Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Today we're very fortunate to have a very esteemed speaker who will be speaking to us about occupied Kashmir. We will introduce him in a second, but before we start the main talk, we're going to have a recitation of Quran by Amar Saria.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أتى أمر الله فلا تستعجلوه سبحانه وتعالى عما يشركون ينزل الملائكة بالروح من أمره على من يشاء من عباده أن أنذروا أنه لا إله إلا أنا فاتقون خلق السماوات والأرض بالحق تعالى عما يشركون خلق الإنسان من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين والأنعام خلقها لكم فيها دفء ومنافع ومنها تأكلون ولكم فيها جمال حين تريحون وحين تسرحون وتحمل أثقالكم إلى بلد لم تكونوا بالغيه إلا بشق الأنفس إن ربكم لرؤوف رحيم والخيل والبغال والحمير لتركبوها وزينة ويخلق ما لا تعلمون وعلى الله قصد السبيل ومنها جائر ولو شاء لهداكم أجمعين صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you very much for that beautiful recitation. We're now very fortunate to have Mohammed Shafiq, who is speaking to us about occupied Kashmir, history, human rights violations, and the future. Mohammed is the chief executive and founding member of the Ramadhan Foundation, which is one of the UK's leading Muslim youth organizations based in Manchester. Married with two daughters, Mohammed is a second-generation British Muslim, born in 1979 to parents from Pakistan, and he attended school and was brought up in Rochdale. Let's welcome him. Salat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, Miqdad, thank you so much for the invitation, and particularly tribute to you for all the work that you are doing for the community of the British Muslims here and around the world. And your work is absolutely vital, and really proud to call you a friend and an ally and a colleague, and above all, as a brother. And thank you for the opportunity. What I want to try to do is talk to you very much about the issue of Kashmir. Now, sometimes we forget the history and the reality of how we got to where we are today. So I will go through my presentation, and if there are any questions or comments, I'll be happy to take them at the end of the presentation. So first of all, that's a bit biography, as Miqdad said, slightly So I've been involved in the Ramadan Foundation since day one, which was 2005. Very active, as you know, on the British media and around the world, and a presenter on British Muslim TV, and before that on my channel and BBC, and Iqra in the Middle East as well. So lots of activity in the media, but also very active in the community. So this is just literally to give you an idea of some of the things we're going to be talking about, how it started, the facts of the history, where we are in terms of the Labour Party and the British political parties, and looking at Prime Minister Modi and his RSS ideology. Okay, so when did this start? So if you look at the image on the left of your screen, you'll see Louis Mountbatten, who's the last Viceroy of India. At the time, the British Empire was still occupying the Indian subcontinent. To his left, you've got Nehru, and to his right, you've got Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And they are just discussing that photograph, and that meeting was how they were going to divide up the territory into the two states. And if you look at the issue of Kashmir, you can see here, and the picture on here is the actual land of Kashmir. Obviously here, as you can see, it's Pakistan controlled, Azad Kashmir, and Gilgit-Baltistan, which is a separate entity, but also gets its security from Pakistan. You've got the Indian administered area, which we'll talk about in a second, and you've got these bits here, which are occupied and controlled by the Chinese. So the dispute started between India and Pakistan before independence in 1947. At the time of independence, there were various princely states, and Jammu and Kashmir was one of them. It had a majority Muslim population, but was governed by the Maharaja Hari Singh. And to avert pressure to join either new nation, as the planning was being done to create these two new states, India and Pakistan, the Maharaja signed a standstill agreement with Pakistan so that they could use that opportunity to continue to trade between the borders and the two entities. India didn't sign that trade decision and agreement with the princely state, but at the time of partition, when you saw the violence on both sides, you saw killing and the mass migration. At that point, the Maharaja reached out to the Indian government and the Indian army and wanted them to provide security and protection for the Jammu and Kashmir. And what happened there was that India said to the Maharaja, if you want our protection, you're going to have to cede and come over under our control, which he ultimately then did. So how much does India actually occupy of Kashmir? India controls around 48% of the land of Kashmir. The area includes Jammu, the Kashmir Valley, and most of Ladakh and the Siachen glaciers. And actually, the Indian population in Kashmir of three parts, it has 70% of the population in Indian occupied Kashmir. So what about Pakistan and China? Pakistan controls about 35%, three areas, as we saw on the map on the previous slide, called Azad Kashmir and Gilgit-Baltistan, is made up of the northern and western portions of the region. And the capital of Azad Kashmir is Muzaffarabad. Now they have their own parliament, the prime minister and president and government and judicial system. But in terms of security, Pakistan provides that security and is very much linked in under the umbrella of Pakistan. And then finally, you've got China controls 17%, and the area particularly is called Aksai Chin in the northern most part of the region. And you might have heard about this in the news in the past few weeks, these military skirmishes between the two groups, the Chinese and the Indians. Well, that's that area of conflict, which both sides claim that they have a right to. So let's look at human rights abuses. Now, human rights abuses have been an integral part of the Indian government's policy in Kashmir for decades. They think that by oppressing people, by killing them, by scaring them, that they will stop people's appetite and passion for independence and self-determination. And if anything, if the fight for freedom and human rights around the world has taught anything in our history, it's that rather than people losing hope, people's opinions and policies and ambition has been strengthened as a result of living under that occupation. According to the United Nations and independent human rights group, 47,455 Kashmiris have been killed since October 1989 when the uprising happened. And just to tell you about how much military are there to carry out that occupation and oppression, between 350,000 and 400,000 army and paramilitary forces are based in Jammu and Kashmir. And this is a really sad and shocking statistic, but 6,300 women have been raped without any recourse to justice. And you hear about the stories of military personnel and the authorities, paramilitaries, going into villages and raping women. And very much like in Israel, settlements and busing in Hindus to Kashmir to actually change the dynamic on the ground, change the ethnic and religious makeup of the state of Kashmir. Rape, torture, disappearance are commonplace, as are deaths in custody. And these abuses are part of a wider campaign of intimidation of the Kashmiri people in Indian-held Kashmir to stop their passion for independence and freedom. And the Human Rights Watch, which is a reputable human rights organization, documented in 1997 that in Singhpur village, occupational forces barged into the house of Abdul Ahad and forcibly took his wife and daughter into a military camp where they were gang raped. And that's the reality of what people are living under in occupied Kashmir. So one of the questions which caused lots of concern in the Labour Party and political circles here in the UK, around the world, was, is Kashmir a bilateral issue? You saw that meeting between Prime Minister Imran Khan and US President Donald Trump, and saying that, you know, he was prepared to mediate between the two sides. Well, India and Pakistan both say it's a bilateral issue. But why is this so offensive to the Kashmiri people and the cause? Now, Kashmiris on both sides of the border, both in Indian-held Kashmir and Azad Jammu Kashmir, believe that it's not a bilateral issue and that they've been ignored. The UN Charter of Human Rights is very clear. People have the right to determine their own future, and a key principle is self-determination. So the reality is, you cannot resolve the issue of Kashmir unless the people of Kashmir are at the heart of that. And those talks won't ever succeed if it's just India talking to Pakistan. Hence why you see the uproar when the new Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, made his comments after his election was announced in April this year. And that's why it caused so much concern amongst many British Kashmiris, but also Kashmiris around the world. So what did Keir Starmer and Keir Labour Party's policy in Kashmir? The Labour Party's policy has been to support UN Security Council resolutions on Kashmir. And you have to remember that many Labour MPs represent constituencies with a high concentration of British Kashmiris. So there's that pressure to make sure that they're advocating for their constituents. And the Labour Party conference in Brighton last year passed a motion supporting self-determination for the Kashmiri people. And one of the things that you have to understand about the shift in the Labour Party policy over these past few months, that it actually didn't start under Sir Keir Starmer. It started under Jeremy Corbyn. If you remember, in the election in November 2019, Labour Party chairman Ian Lavery, he started that shift where he basically started moving away from self-determination for the Kashmiri people and saying it's a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. And that was allegedly after a big backlash from the British Indian lobby, and also supported by the BJP party in India. And Sir Keir Starmer, he caused offence. What did he actually say? He said any constitutional issues, this is the changing of the state of Kashmir, are a matter for the Indian Parliament, and Kashmir is a bilateral issue for India and Pakistan to resolve peacefully. So just in that quote, you can see there's no mention of the Kashmiri people. There's no mention about self-determination, and that's why it caused huge concern and why it was so offensive to so many people. So let's look at the other political parties. What about the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats? So Boris Johnson, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, during that general election campaign, visited a mosque. He was questioned about his stance and his government stance on Kashmir, and he said, I have deep sympathy with the people of Kashmir and what is happening to them. But apart from that, apart from those statements, not much has happened. But generally, you see that the Conservatives have been generally more pro-Indian and have tried to ignore the issue of Kashmir. For example, in your neck of the woods, if you're in London, Bob Blackman, who's the MP for Harrow East, he supported Narendra Modi. He supported taking away the rights of the Kashmiri people and the oppression that they've suffered. And the British government has been very quiet on this, apart from a comment that Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, made in the House of Commons, where he condemned the issue of human rights abuses. But apart from that, they've been relatively very quiet. And then you've got the Liberal Democrats under their interim leader there, Ed Davies, as you can see in the picture. They've got a very mixed record when it comes to Kashmir. The parliamentarians MPs that they used to have in some of those diverse constituencies like Bradford East, Rochdale, Birmingham, Bristol, where there is a concentration of British Kashmiris, they were generally a lot more supportive of the Kashmiri cause. But others have remained silent. You look at Charles Kennedy, Paddy Ashdown, Ming Campbell, Tim Farron. Some of these leaders have been very quiet on that. And Nick Clegg, who was the former leader of the Liberal Democrats, he was Deputy Prime Minister, he stayed very quiet on speaking of Kashmir. The only time he ever spoke in Kashmir was when he visited the Kashmir reception organised by the Liberal Democrat Friends of Kashmir at party conferences. But generally, when he was in office as Deputy Prime Minister, he was very, very quiet. So let's just look at those UN Security Council resolutions. One of the very first that was passed was Resolution 47. Remember, this was at the time India and Pakistan were in a military battle, a war over Kashmir. And what the international community wanted to do is stop the bloodshed, stop the military campaign, and have a ceasefire. And as part of that, they passed a resolution stipulating that both India and Pakistan should withdraw their military forces and arrange for a referendum to be held in order to provide the people of Kashmir the choice of which state to join. And you're probably thinking, decades later, that resolution hasn't been implemented and no action's been taken against India or Pakistan to make sure that they implement that resolution. And that the world and the international community has stood by and watched numerous decades of human rights abuses by the Indian authorities. And we've also seen numerous United Nations Human Rights Council reports that have highlighted the abuses that have gone on these past few years, but also going back to 1989. And you remember that image of Donald Trump in the White House meeting Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan and offering mediation between the two countries. That was refused by India on the basis it was a bilateral issue. And what's really worrying in India, that you now have a far-right government of the BJP, which has a huge landslide victory in the last elections and is in their second term. So the chances of mediation, the chances of conversations and peace negotiations to try to resolve this issue 70 years on is very, very remote. So I just want to talk to you a bit about the special law on Kashmir. If you remember Article 370, which was passed in the aftermath of the partition. And what this allowed was that Kashmir, Jammu Kashmir, which is the Indian held, as we describe as Indian held occupied Kashmir, they allowed the state to have their own devolution, their own power, their own constitution, a separate flag, and independence on all matters except foreign affairs, defense, and communication. And that worked relatively well, despite the fact there was loads of human rights abuses. There was an idea that it somehow provided real power to the people of Kashmir, but the reality was somewhat different. And then last August, the Modi government revoked that special law, the Article 370, and replaced it with federal control from New Delhi, so that the state of Jammu Kashmir no longer exists. It's a administrative area which is governed directly from New Delhi and the federal government. At that time in August, it held Kashmiri leaders under house arrest. Many of them are still under house arrest. It banned public gatherings. It restricted internet and phone access. And despite what the news said, those restrictions are still in place nearly a year later. And they then arrested and tortured and held people without any charges in their prisons. And you saw a lot of protests around the world at that change, but also actually, which hasn't often happened in India. You saw those protests as well across India in opposition to the Modi government. But the sad reality is, in the end, that law passed, due to the huge majority that BJP had in the Lok Sabha, which is their federal parliament. I just want to finish off, if I may, to talk to you a bit about Narendra Modi and his RSS ideology, this far-right extremist ideology which believes that India is for Hindus, and anybody who's from a minority, whether that be Muslims, Christians, shouldn't have any rights, and they should be browbeaten into following and supporting RSS ideology. And it's been around for over 100 years, and it's also been accused of plotting assassinations, stalking rights among minorities, and acts of terrorism. And you've seen the reality of that in India over these past few years, where people have been lynched, Muslims have been attacked and killed, literally killed in the streets because they're Muslim, simply. And also not forgetting that the minority Christian community and their places of worship, the churches, have also been desecrated and they've been attacked and abused. And remember that Mahatma Gandhi was shot in 1948 by an RSS supporter and member. And we've seen all these past few years, mosques being burnt, Muslim homes and businesses attacked, whilst the Prime Minister and his government have turned a blind eye, where the authorities have actually, turned a blind eye, and in some cases have encouraged that violence, as we've seen on university campuses, in madrasas and in mosques over the years. So if it's okay with you, Miqdad, I'm going to stop there. I hope that gives you a historical context of how the issue of Kashmir began and how it is now. I just kind of finish on the fact that my parents come from Azad Kashmir, a city called Mirpur, and so obviously this is very much a personal issue for me, and very passionate about this issue. So I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments. Jazakallah.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. Obviously, the issue of Kashmir is something that matters a lot to many people in this country and abroad. Maybe it's worth. Can I ask a couple of questions? Can we just have a couple of questions a bit about the UK and a number of Kashmiris in the UK and how, where do they come from when it comes to the UK? So just a bit more about Kashmiris in this country.
Yeah, so in terms of ethnic minorities, the largest group amongst ethnic minorities is British Kashmiris, close to 1.2 million Kashmiris who are resident, particularly in Birmingham, Manchester, Bradford, Leeds, Halifax, Rochdale, Oldham. You can see them down south in Slough, in Walthamstow, Leighton, spread out in Bristol as well, across the country. And there's a small community as well in Glasgow, and a very small handful of few people in Belfast as well.
Thank you. Let me ask Iqbal Asaria. I'm going to ask him to unmute, and then he's got a couple of questions. 1 second. There you go.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mohammed, for that very clear explanation of what's happening. I have two questions. In your last slide, you had 4 photographs on the top. Can you explain what they show?
So the first one, yeah. So you've got the RSS people, and you can see Narendra Modi in the picture as well. And it's very much a similar sign. The ideology is very much similar to Hitler and the Nazis about one ethnic community having dominance over everybody else.
Can you put it on the screen, please?
Oh, sorry. Let me just get this on the screen. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. I'm just trying to share my screen once again. Okay. There we are. I don't know if people can see that. And as you can see there, so the first image, as you can see, is Narendra Modi there on the right of the picture, and these are some of the key leaders of the RSS group. And then you can see the similarity. Again, these are not my images, I've taken them from the internet, but you can see the similarities to Adolf Hitler and his signals and signs. And then actually, if you go in further on the picture, you see the vigilantes who were trained as military people. to take on this historical religious war against Muslims and minorities. And these are the people who generally are trained up in violence. And wherever there's violence across India, you will see most of these people involved in that. And then you see at the end, the RSS, that's just a picture of our RSS event in New Delhi.
So Mohammed, just for your information,
sure.
When we were in Uganda, I mean, this is going back 50 years, some of our Hindu friends, their parents, dads especially, used to have this khaki shirt and stick and go for training. So they were RSS members. So this has been in the making for a long time. It's not new. And it's sort of, I'm sure Hindu communities here also practice that. And that is what is worrying me. The other thing is that they also use the swastika as one of their symbols. Yeah. So it is a common symbol between Nazis and them.
Yeah. Yes, they do. And if you look at the ideology and how you link it back to here, the UK, when the Labour Party took a principled stance for self-determination for the Kashmiri people, actually the BJP were supporting campaigns against Labour MPs in this country and encouraging places like, Bob Blackman and others to get them to win by interfering in the democratic process in this country. And it was surprising that there wasn't much, as you saw in America when allegations of Russia interference. There was a huge political story, and here in the UK there was no story. But you're absolutely right. This is an ideology that has been in the making for over 100 years, and their aim has been to use Modi as the face to carry out their atrocities and implement their ideology of global dominance in terms of their territory in India.
Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iqbal Uncle. I'm going to now ask Ahmed. Where is he? Oh, he's just left. Is he left? No, he's there. Okay. Please go ahead, Ahmed. Uncle.
Okay, assalamu alaikum.
Wassalam, Ahmed. Good to hear your voice.
Thank you, likewise. You call Kashmir under Indian rule as Indian administered Kashmir, whilst the Kashmir in Pakistan is Azad Kashmir. Is Kashmir in Pakistan actually independent?
So if you look at the government makeup in Azad Kashmir, it's totally independent. It has its own president, its prime minister, chief justice, a separate legal system. Obviously there are links with Pakistan. So if the Pakistani military were to leave Pakistan-held Kashmir, let's just describe it as that. It wouldn't take a few days for them to occupy Azad Kashmir. And so the security that Pakistan is providing to the Azad Kashmir government. But the government depends on support from Pakistan. So it's very much linked. And people do say it's occupied. Some Kashmiris do say that it's occupied. But I actually see Pakistan as a partner and a defender in terms of the security of Azad Kashmir. But generally, the government itself has the autonomy and the power to make decisions themselves and determine their own future. And that's the difference, sorry, Ahmed, with Indian-held Kashmir. But there isn't that democracy, there isn't that human rights, and there isn't that freedom. I go to Pakistan every year, I go to Azad Kashmir every year. You could protest against the government of Azad Kashmir quite openly in those cities, those territories. You couldn't do that in India.
There's another question I wanted to ask you.
Sure.
When you talked about the initial creation, when Kashmir went to India and when the other side went to Pakistan, didn't Nehru in June 1947 said very clearly that it is the people of the princely states, all the states, should vote who they want to go with. It was Jinnah who refused. Surely if Jinnah had agreed, maybe both sides of Kashmir would have been in Pakistan today.
Yeah, I mean, I'll leave that to the historians to discover, but I think there was a clear attempt by the British, for example, when they carved out the territory to the two states, that they left the Kashmiri issue undecided, and there were other princely states around India that chose to go with India. that were also not decided. And yeah, at the end of the day, both sides have to be committed to that process, which is let the Kashmiri people decide their future and they determine their own future. And if they decide to go with India, that's their democratic choice.
No, but Jinnah refused to give them that choice.
Well, I think in negotiations that might have been the case, but if it came to an actual referendum, I'm pretty certain that history will prove that the people of Kashmir would want to, majority of them wanted to actually be independent. They didn't want to be.
That's not my question. My question is Jinnah is the one who refused to give the people of Kashmir a right to vote who they should accede to.
Yeah, well, I think that's in relation to when the negotiations were happening. I think the idea that if you had a princely, the Maharaja signed an agreement with Pakistan to allow that trading to go on. So the idea that, you know, Pakistan didn't want to support the Kashmiri cause, I don't think that's true. I mean, there were negotiations and discussions. I mean, history will tell you that. And obviously, if you've got better knowledge on that, then I'm happy to take your point.
Okay. Thank you very much. A question which comes from Mariam Asaria. She asks, thank you very much for the talk. Really interesting and helpful. Are there any hopeful campaigns that are creating any meaningful change within India, like the Shaheen Bagh protests in response to the CAA? Are they making any real difference?
I think there's a uprising now in India. People who understand that this RSS ideology about dominance is actually going to destroy India's fabric as a democracy. And you've seen the fruits of that, where you've seen a number of state elections in which BJP, the party of Prime Minister Modi and his government, have been defeated. And you're starting to see an uprising there amongst young people who are saying, we don't want to live in a country like that. Yes, he's very popular. Yes, he's got a huge landslide. And it's a long process, but you are beginning to see the fruits of people rising up against this government and this ideology.
Thank you very much. Another question from Manzoor Lalji. In your opinion, what's the role of Israel in India, given the close relationship with Modi and Netanyahu? And also,
Yeah, so I think if you look at the pattern, Miqdad, of what's happening now in India, Indian-held Kashmir, it's very much a similar pattern to what the Israelis did in their occupation of Palestinian land. You remember after the Palestinians were expelled, they had a 1967 war in which they occupied the West Bank. And then in recent years, you've actually seen those illegal settlements. You've seen Jewish settlements that have been created and supported and encouraged and built by the government there to change the dynamics on the ground. And that's what India wants to do with bringing in Hindus and Sikhs into Jammu Kashmir, so that they can change the dynamics of the state, so that if it ever came to negotiation, that it would benefit them. And you see very much similar, the human rights abuses that you see in Palestine is very much similar to what you see in Indian-held Kashmir. And I was in Gaza in 2013 and 14 in the aftermath of Israeli aggression there. And when you tell them you're from Kashmir, they get really, really strengthened by the fact that the cause is the same. They might be different enemies in terms of Israel and Indian as the occupying forces, but the principle that they are both following, the path which Modi is now following, is very much the path which the Israelis have done in Palestine.
Following on from that, given you talked about India's role in the UK elections in terms of trying to influence the election here, do you think that Israel had a similar role? And do you think they're working together between India and Israel, given Modi and Netanyahu's link, or not?
I think we know that the Israeli embassy, for example, if you watch the Al Jazeera reports at the time about the pressure that Jeremy Corbyn was under, that there was that involvement of people trying to interfere in the Labour Party, and we know an embassy official was expelled from the Israeli diplomatic service. But so that's the evidence. Did it succeed? Probably not, because in the end, people were determined, to see expression of standing up against injustice around the world. It's central to Labour Party principles, essential to trade union movement. And instead of, yes, you might have seen now a new leader of the Labour Party moving back to the centre, but the sentiment of the people out there is very much in support of Palestine and Kashmir.
All right, and when it comes to looking at the future and what you think is most likely, given that right now the direction of travel seems to be very clear when it comes to the Indian side of things and the choices made by Modi, what do you think realistically is likely to happen, and what do you think that we should be campaigning for and supporting?
I think we've got to expose the RSS ideology. I think that's really important on the international stage, that this is not something that was dreamt up overnight. This is an ideology which wants dominance of Indian society and wants to oppress minority communities. In terms of Kashmir, you've seen it where people are being given citizenship, and giving residency rights to move to Kashmir and to do business there, to establish themselves and their families, so that they change the ethnic makeup of that country. And what it's been going on for decades. I never stopped believing that one day Kashmir will be free, and always campaign on that, always speak and raise our voices. But we've got to expose the atrocities that they're committing, and hope that over time that both sides come to the table, along with the Kashmiri people, and resolve this one way or the other.
Another question that's come through: how can the Western media be influenced on this issue? Because it looks like the atrocities are hidden and there's not much media allowed in the area. You talked also about the RSS and their atrocities being exposed. Are there good resources in English which highlight and summarize and in a very clear way what the RSS is historically and currently is doing? And how can we ensure that media in this country reflect and that and are able to report on that? And adding to that, noting also that there is a media blackout there, which makes it even more difficult.
Yeah, I think that's the key point. There's deliberate media blackout because they did not want people to know what's going on in Kashmir. You've had parliamentarians whose visas have been rejected because they don't want people into independent human rights monitors have not been allowed into Indian Kashmir. And the question that gets asked, but if they've got nothing to hide, then why are they not allowing people in? I think credit to the BBC, for example, they were able to talk to some people on the ground in Kashmir, and they published that. But the contrast, if you want, Miqdad, you see in the media is the blanket coverage that Hong Kong protests were getting around the same time last summer, at the same time as the Indian tried to change the state law. And you look at the contrast, how much resources were being put into giving us that. So yeah, I think we've got to continue to raise our concerns through the political platform, but actually essential for us to raise our voices through the media to make sure that that voice is amplified. And I think part of the problem is obviously the lack of coverage from there, and the lack of courage, if you like, from some parts of the Indian media who are more interested in saber rattling, and pumping out their chest and having fights with Pakistan media and politicians, rather than actually saying, let's just report the news, let's report what's going on.
Thank you. Fatima also wants to continue, and she asks, well, what about Amnesty International? Are they doing anything? What about other human rights groups like or Stop the War? Why don't we see any of those organizations doing that?
So Amnesty International have been very good. They have documented the atrocities that have happened, up until, I think, from 1989 onwards. And Human Rights Watch, as I quoted in the presentation, and you see many other independent human rights organizations around the world documenting that. But and again, when we look at the the Israeli model in terms of oppressing the Palestinians, it's very much similar in their reaction, in how they react to some of these human rights reports. And so Amnesty International have been very brave in putting it out there and putting the facts out there as they've documented based on actual testimony and evidence from Indian-held Kashmir. But you talked about, Stop the War. No, we haven't. We haven't seen that. I think there's a conversation to be had with colleagues and friends in Stop the War that they choose their battles very carefully based on political reasons, maybe in this country, around the world. So if it was a war being conducted, an occupation by the United States and the UK and its allies, then we're very vocal and we speak out. But when it's something like this, we're pretty silent. So yeah, I urge them, I urge everybody around the world to speak up for the Kashmiri cause and the Palestinian cause, because these are two injustices in the world over the last 70, 80 years that haven't been resolved, and people are still being oppressed, still being killed on a daily basis. We see that in Gaza, we see it in the West Bank as well as to what's happening. And then we've got, we've got Donald Trump in the White House. We've got potential, of annexing West Bank lands that has been happening, by the Israeli government. That's really causing concern for the Palestinian international community. And then we have a Modi far-right government that wants to change the dynamics on the ground and is trying to be successful in that.
Abu Saud, I think you've got your hand up. I'm not sure if that's intentional. If so, please ask your question.
Abu Saud, I like to say, when 2 weeks were only given by Mountbatten to pursue 600 odd princely state, whether to join Pakistan or India, the V.S. Menon, the secretary to Vallabhbhai Patel, secretary to Mountbatten, he was allowed to go to see the Prince of Kashmir, Hari Singh. But when Quaid-e-Azam asked Mountbatten, he liked to go and pursue him as well, he was refused on the ground of safety and security. That is written, as our brother Versi was saying, he did not refuse to go, he was refused by Mountbatten. Second question, the safety of Muslim living in India. We should negotiate in UK behind the door with BJP, friends of BJP, that these Muslim is not going to cross the border. They're going to stay in India, and they claim to be Indian, very loyal Indian Muslims, and they're going to stay there forever. Why there should be more than 500 riots since independence? And recently we have seen as well, because of RSS and whatever, we should negotiate behind the scene, saying, brother, these Muslims is your citizen, they're going to remain there, and they're contributing already economics of India. RSS have been successful. They're trying and trying. Congress stopped it after independence. Now Congress has split it in many numbers of party. Now the BJP have sprung up, and they're issuing the policy which was introduced in by 1920 by Mr. Mukherjee and other, and that is carry on. We must negotiate internationally. All of us doing a lot better, but as mentioned by many of my friends about Israel, Israel said that when we come, all the negativity about India will be gone. They offered the same thing to Pakistan. If you join open embassy, all the negativity of Pakistan international media, that will gone. Pakistan is not ready yet for that. Unfortunately, a lot of Muslim countries have loose connection with Israel. Pakistan is not ready for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abu Saud, sorry. I mean, the first point, I think you're right. If you read the history books, the British deliberately left the issue of Kashmir unresolved. And the other princely states, as you referred to, there were a number of states that weren't under the direct control of the British Empire, who were given the choice to choose which way they wanted to go. And it would have been right and proper for the Maharaja of Kashmir, where there was a majority Muslim population, to actually say, well, actually, we want to be independent, or we want to be with Pakistan. So there were conversations going on about trade and other agreements, as I said in the presentation, but actually about overall control of the state, that didn't happen. And I think that was a deliberate attempt by the British to leave this problem unresolved so that those two countries would continue to, you know, bicker and fight amongst themselves. And what have we learned over 70 years? That's what's happening. In terms of your point around Pakistan and, you know, Israel and all their sort of Muslim countries, I think what we've got to do is how can you negotiate with somebody who says that you're not worthy of being negotiated to, that your life is not worthy, you just being attacked and killed because you're a Muslim or you're a Christian, you're a minority. And I think that you can't compromise with these people, and you cannot negotiate with people who have an ideology, a far-right ideology, which is about global dominance of one particular race in their territory. And that's what I find difficult to do. What we can do is shine a light on that through the media, through social media. Lots of young people are active in them networks, and, you know, holding a light to what's happening in India. I think that's really important.
Sorry. Another question from Manzoor. With the recent advances of China in Kashmir and Ladakh, will this have any effect on the situation in Kashmir in terms of Indian military presence in the area?
No, I think there is a clear strategic role that you see Pakistan and China playing. They're very close partners. You see that you know, CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, going through Pakistan. China is investing a lot of money in that country, and so if you look at the 17% of Kashmir that's under Chinese control, it was given deliberately by the Pakistanis to, you know, to tie in China into this Kashmir problem, and so you get that friction, if you like, between the Indians and the Chinese, but they understand that that military aggression won't be recognized. And then you saw, I think last year, the you know, Modi government trying to attack Azad Kashmir, and their pilots being captured and, you know, given a cup of tea and sent on his way back home. And so there's that sort of battle going on as well. But if you live on the line of control in Azad Kashmir, people are dying on a daily basis because of the shelling from the Indian side, and that hasn't stopped. Life is still very hard for the people who live on the border. People are dying on a daily basis from that shelling and firing from the military there.
Okay, another question from Mr. Nizar Marali. We're all aware of the Palestinian liberation movement in the UK and elsewhere. Whilst you haven't got massively great tangible results, the movement is very visible. Do you feel the Kashmir liberation movement lacks a similar luster? And what can we do to enhance this? Yeah,
that's a really good question, because you've got the JKLF, which is the Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front, which is very much about independence, and they don't want any association with Pakistan or India in Azad Kashmir. So JKLF operate in both Jammu Kashmir, standing up against the oppression from the Indians, but also operates in Azad Kashmir and very much about, you know, we don't want to be part of Pakistan. And that's been a big struggle, because you've got people in Pakistan who say Kashmir, there's a slogan, I'll explain it in Urdu, Kashmir banega Pakistan. And that's been the slogan which politicians for decades have said, Kashmir is going to become Pakistan. And then you've got the Kashmiri people who are saying, wait a minute, we don't want to be Pakistan. We want our right to determine our own future. And that's causing a lot of friction. And if you look at some of the protests that happened last year, you had that tussle. I spoke at a couple of events where you had, you know, Pakistanis who think that we should, you know, Kashmiris should be grateful for the fact that they're providing shelter. And, you know, we shouldn't criticize the Pakistani military or government. And then you've got other side who said Pakistan is as bad as India in its occupation, which is, you know, which is far-fetched and not based on any truth. So that, you know, whilst that movement is there, it's very much fragmented. And if you look at the Palestinian cause, you know, you've got groups there operating relatively the same ideology, relatively the same passion, principles, and goals. Whereas in Kashmir, it's very much divided between those who are pro-Pakistani, those who are pro-Indian, and then people in the middle who don't want anything to do with either side.
Thank you very much. Does Kashmir need the equivalent of an army stationed at India's border?
Well, that's the army already stationed at their border is the Pakistani army. And what I often say to my Kashmiri friends, family, and brothers and sisters when they raise this issue about, India, Pakistan should withdraw its forces from Azad Kashmir. If Pakistan withdrew its forces from Azad Kashmir, probably 48 hours it would take for the Indian authorities to occupy Azad Kashmir. And so the army, Pakistan army, is at the forefront at that border, standing up to India and making sure that they don't do anything which damages Azad Kashmir. And I just think sometimes people in Kashmir, as passionate as they are for independence or self-determination, forget that the one security that they've got when the rest of the world has forgot them, the international community is turning a blind eye, is Pakistan and its military, and we should pay tribute to them for that.
Is that military there with the permission of the Kashmiri government?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So successive Kashmiri governments, Azad Kashmir parliaments and assemblies have passed rulings in support of the Pakistani authorities. And they do have lots of control in lots of different areas, which is obviously a bit of a shocker for us. If you imagine nationalization of, electricity, gas, telecommunication, cement, and all these sort of companies which the army operate, which is normal practice in that part of the world, but isn't in this country. And so, yeah, that army is there to protect Azad Kashmir's population from the Indian aggression. And India knows that if they try anything stupid, they'll get a fitting response from the Pakistani authorities. And many Pakistani soldiers have given up their life. They've become shaheed in defense of Azad Kashmir, and we shouldn't forget that.
Final question which come through. What is your view of all these people who talk about terrorists in the same way as they talk about Palestinian terrorists and the Kashmiri terrorists? How do you see this issue?
Well, I think there's two sides to this. One is terrorism as a political tool is forbidden in Islam, and the scholars have been absolutely clear about that. And so if people are carrying out atrocities against innocent people, then that's absolutely totally wrong and should be condemned. And we always condemn those atrocities, whether that was in Afghanistan, whether it's in Iraq, or whether it's in Kashmir or anywhere else. But there is a legitimate military fight for freedom, and the people of Kashmir have the right to defend their lives, their families, and stand up to that aggression and oppression against the occupying force, very much similar to what's happening in Palestine. But yeah, there's a big, as you well know, Miqdad, been very experienced in the media business. It's about a narrative, and it's about trying to make out as if the Israelis, for example, in Gaza, blame the Palestinians. If a child gets killed in a bomb, it's the Palestinians' fault, because they don't want to take any responsibility, and that's very much similar in India. So yes, very clear that if Kashmiri separatists and freedom fighters and the organizations that are attacking innocent civilians, then I absolutely condemn that. I always have done, always will do. But if they're standing up against that oppression and defending their families and their livelihoods and their communities, then that's their absolute right. Fighting for their freedom and justice is a human right after all.
Thank you very much. I think we actually will unfortunately have to end there because it's coming up to Maghrib time right now. Thank you so much for talking and for answering the many questions that came through afterwards. It shows the interest on this topic across. Thank you to those who have joined the Zoom call and those who have joined on YouTube. Just a reminder of the lecture next week. It's on Islam and Slavery by Professor Clarence Smith. Please do join then. And every Sunday we have tafsir with Sheikh Bahmanpur, and that starts that's at 9 a.m. You can find it you can join live on the same live stream on youtube.com/secondtv/live. We also have a virtual Zoom, virtual yoga classes every Tuesday at 6 p.m. Please do find out and talk to a member of the executive committee if you'd like to find out more. And our Husseini Madrasa classes we're talking about how to best move them forward, and talk to Asia or the head or other people within the admin team at the madrasa to find out more details. We are still keeping all of our lectures online for now. We will keep you in the loop as to when or if that will change, but our expectations in the short to medium term, we're still going to retain everything online. And so with that, thank you very much to everyone for joining. Thank you, Mohammed, for
Thank you.
giving us the opportunity to listen and hear your insights. And thank you very much, everyone else.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thanks, Salaam.